Alrighty, hello everyone. I hope you had a fantastic weekend. Happy Tuesday to everyone. I am unfortunately still stuck in Lexington, Kentucky right now. So I'm recording this from the comfort of my hotel room, and hopefully we'll be back and ready to go on Thursday. But until then, lecture will be online today and will be this recorded over Zoom. Really quickly, I'm going to post this video onto Canvas and you'll see it in the files for Unit 2. You are still responsible, even if you do not get through all of this video today, you are still responsible for understanding all of the content that I've laid out in this lecture. So if we don't finish today, right, please make sure that you go online on Canvas, click on files, and rewatch or watch this video in full. Okay? Awesome. Couple other quick reminders. Number one, we're going to be taking our Filipino and Japanese immigrants mini quiz. If you are a student with extended time, if you're a student with extended time, you can go ahead right now and head on over to ARC. You're just going to take the quiz there, and then you are going to come back and after you're done with the quiz. Okay. So if you are an extended time student, if you get 100%, 50% extended time, go ahead and head over to ARC now. You're just going to come back after you take your quiz. Okay. The passcode should be directly found on the quiz instructions. The passcode directly found on the quiz instructions. Okay. Next, homework week number 16 is going to be your essay number 2 outline that has now been posted on Canvas. Please make sure you turn it in by next Tuesday. Homework week 16, your essay outline. Please make sure that you submit that on the Canvas. Okay, 15 easy points. Alrighty, that concludes all of our announcements. Let's jump right in and let's start with some review. So last time, folks, we talked a little bit, we finished up our chapter on Filipino Americans, and then we started our chapter on South Asians. What I want us to talk about right now is take 30 seconds, turn to your elbow partner and discuss very quickly, right? How did we get so many Filipino nurses in the United States? You read an article about this last time, right? How did we have, or why do we have so many Filipino nurses in the US? Take 30 seconds, turn to your elbow partner, and discuss. Sub, if you could pause this video for 30 seconds. Fantastic. I hope you had a really good discussion. After we finished our chapter on Filipino immigrants, we transitioned into talking about South Asian immigrants. What I want you to do now is I want you to turn to your elbow partner and just discuss a little bit. What were some reasons as to why Sikh Americans came, or Sikh immigrants came to the United States? So again, what are some reasons as to why Sikh immigrants came to the United States? Go ahead and take 30 seconds and discuss. Sub, if you could pause this video. The last thing we discussed in our South Asian Part 1 lecture was how Sikh immigrants, as well as South Asian immigrants, were treated in the United States. I want you to take 30 seconds and just review a little bit. What were some ways in which South Asian immigrants were discriminated in the United States? Or how were they treated in the United States? Where did they work? Go ahead and take 30 seconds and discuss. So, folks, remember that Sikh immigrants came over to the United States because of the fact that many folks in Great Britain, Great Britain, had annexed and had basically colonized most of India, right? And these Sikh immigrants were in the Punjab region, and they really did not appreciate, right, how they were segregated and treated as separate and different from society. And that's why they came over to the United States. Many of them wanted more opportunities in different places where they knew they perhaps would not be subject to the same discrimination as they were under the British in India. Unfortunately, though, as we know in the United States, they didn't fare much better, right? In 1917, we see the Asiatic Barred Zone Act, right? That bars immigration from an entire sort of area, Southeast Asia, South Asia, right? And a little bit of West Asia, so like Afghanistan, Iran, right? Those places were barred from being able to immigrate to the United States. We also see Supreme Court cases like US versus Thind, right? Which basically said that even though those who are Indian are Caucasian, at the end of the day, because they didn't look white and they didn't fit the standard definition of what a Caucasian was at the time, their citizenship was rejected. Those who were Sikh could not become citizens. And we're going to actually today talk a little bit about a loophole that the Sikh used in order to sort of be able to still own land, right? Because remember, just like the Japanese immigrants, the alien land law that prevented non-citizens from owning land still applied to the Sikhs, right? So we see de jure discrimination still in place, including anti-miscegenation laws, and like I said, the Alien Land Act, as well as the Asiatic Barred Zone Act and U.S. versus Thin, making life difficult for Sikh immigrants in the United States. Fantastic. All right. We're just going to go ahead and start lecture from here on out. So again, last time we talked a little bit about de jure discrimination. Now we're going to see what that looks like in action, right? We're going to talk a little bit about the story of Vaishno Das Bagai. There are some articles printed out on the teacher's desk, or that I have handed directly to you if you're in locate 204, Dr. Sullivan. If you could please pass out that article. It should be titled Bridges Burnt Behind, the story of Vaishno Das Bagai and Kala Bagai. So again, Sub, if you could go ahead and pass out those articles to the class. Alrighty, students, what you are going to do is I'm going to give you 10 minutes to go ahead and read over this article. I want you to find evidence that proves this thesis. Quote, despite being viewed as a land of opportunity, America sought to separate those who were South Asian from being white through both de facto and de jure discrimination. Again, we see how here, right? Through de facto and de jure discrimination. We see why, right? Sought to separate those who are South Asian from being white, right? At the end of the day, right, America sought to separate those who are South Asian from being white because they were, despite being a land filled with opportunity, right? Why did they do that, or how did they do that, right? Through de facto and de jure discrimination. What I want you to do is I want you, as you're reading, to underline or highlight, box, whatever you want to do, pieces of evidence that help you prove this thesis. Okay, so go ahead, take 10 minutes right now, read the article. Afterwards, underline, highlight, so on and so forth, pieces of evidence as you're reading. After you are done, either directly on the article or in the notebook or in your notebooks, I want you to write down and analyze. How does one piece of evidence, whatever one you choose, right? How does that prove your thesis? Or how does that prove this thesis, right? How does your piece of evidence prove this thesis? Okay, go ahead and take 10 minutes to do both of those things. Read the article, highlight as you're reading, underline as you're reading, analyze one piece of evidence in your notebook or on the article. Go ahead. Fantastic. I hope everyone was able to read and get through as much of that article as possible. What I want you to do now is I want you to discuss for about 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Turn to your elbow partner and talk to each other. First, tell them the example that you chose. And second, read or explain how that piece of evidence proves your thesis or proves this thesis, right? So go ahead, turn to your elbow partner and discuss just for maybe 1.5, 2-ish minutes, right? What is the one piece of evidence you chose in the article, and how does it support this thesis? Okay, Sub, if you could pause this video for give or take about 1.5 or 2 minutes. I hope everyone had a fruitful and fantastic discussion. So one of the pieces of evidence that I chose was the piece of evidence where in 1923, the Supreme Court rules in US versus Thin that Indians were not considered Caucasian or not considered white, right? And as a result, were not eligible for citizenship, right? This is super critical, right? And this proves this thesis because at the end of a day, the guy was denied and had his citizenship revoked, right? He was a US citizen and then has his citizenship revoked, taken away. And so as a result, right, this shows that at the end of the day, America really just wanted to separate those who are South Asian, right, from those who are white. They want to deny those who are South Asian from being able to advance in society, right, from being able to own land or from being able to even own his store, right? At the end of the day, after Bagai gets his citizenship revoked, his assets are liquidated, right? He loses his store. He is kicked out of his home, right? He is depressed and eventually commits suicide, right? So at the end of the day, this all shows that really, despite being a land of opportunity, despite Bagai being able to own his store, start his own sort of chain of stores, and build move in right to a new house, all of those things were taken away from him because of because his citizenship was revoked, right? So that's how this sort of proves this thesis, right? And that's an example of de jure discrimination. Fantastic. What I want us to do now is I want us to do a little sort of pairing activity. This pairing activity is all about comparing and contrasting de jure discrimination. Okay. So, what I want you to do is I want you to remember back from Unit 2, Part 1, as well as Unit 2, Part 2, right? And I want you to create couplets, right? Which ethnic groups have been discriminated in a way that were similar to how South Asians were treated or similar to how other ethnic groups were treated, right? How and which other ethnic groups were perhaps treated differently, right? What is a common recurring theme when it comes to discrimination against these ethnic groups? And as a hint, if you want to focus specifically, as I am asking you, on laws, right? Understand how laws end up treating different people. So let me give you an example of what I mean. Alrighty. So I hope everyone can see my whiteboard. Now, here's an example of a couplet that I came up with, right? The Asiatic Barred Zone Act and the Chinese Exclusion Act, right? What's the Asiatic Barred Zone Act again, right? Remember in 1917, the United States passes a law that basically bans immigration from Southeast Asian, South Asian, as well as some West Asian countries, right? So even though we're not discriminating against a particular ethnic group, like they're not saying that South Asians as a whole or Indians as a whole cannot immigrate to the United States, at the end of the day, they're including a bulk, vast majority of regions and different countries, right? So it is effectively serves as a means to exclude immigrants. That's very similar, right, to the Chinese Exclusion Act, right, which barred Chinese immigrants from being able to come to the US in 1882, right, and onward. So this is an example of a couplet. What I want you to do is I want you to work with your Apple partners, and you're going to get 4 minutes, right? 4 minutes. I want you to write down as many couplets as you can. This may do with law. You can, for example, how were Mexican Americans treated and perhaps how were Chinese Americans treated. There were maybe some taxes per se that both of them had to pay, right? How were land rights similar to or different to each other when it came to Native Americans and Mexican Americans, right? What I want you to do is I want you to write down as many couplets as you can and sort of explain how those couplets relate to each other in your notebook. Okay, so you're going to get about 4 minutes to do that. Sub, if you could pause this video and let them collaborate for 4 minutes. Fantastic. I hope everyone had a really good time sort of writing down all of these examples and couplets together. Here are a couple other ones that I sort of came up with just on the spot, right? So, for example, the alien land law affects both South Asians and the Japanese, right? Both of these individuals cannot own any land because they're not considered citizens. Another good example is the foreign miners tax, right? This tax affected both Mexicans and the Chinese, right? Both of these immigrant groups were targeted as a result of their foreignness, right? Them not being citizens meant that at the end of the day, they had to pay and fork over $3 every month in order to mine, right? Another good one would be Ozawa versus US and US versus Thind, right? Both of these cases denied citizenship to those who were Japanese and those who were South Asian, right? It's really interesting, right? Because the Supreme Court makes this sort of this sort of weird logical leap here, right? In Ozawa, right, the reason why we get to deny U.S. citizenship against those who are Japanese was because at the end of the day, you had to be Caucasian in order to be a citizen. And in U.S. versus Thin, the U.S. Supreme Court sort of uh, warps that logic, right? They concede that at the end of the day, Thin is Caucasian, but because the common definitions of being a Caucasian at the time meant that you were white, right, and had light skin color and weren't black or brown. At the end of the day, the U.S. feels comfortable denying Thin citizenship, even though he's Caucasian, right? Because his skin is not white, right? So in both cases, U.S. citizenship is denied to an ethnic group. Furthermore, you have anti-miscegenation laws, right? Anti-miscegenation laws, nation laws affected those who were um, Chinese, affected those who were Filipino, affected those who were Black slaves, affected those who were South Asian, right? All of these different ethnic groups were not allowed to marry each other, right? And so at the end of the day, we see time and time again these examples of de jure discrimination play out. Now, gentlemen, I want to revisit one important thing, right? One important sort of type of law that was passed that denied the rights of those who were non-citizens to own land, right? The Alien Land Law. So remember that the Alien Land Law basically said no citizen can own any land in the United States. Now, there were some loopholes that people used to sort of like get under that, right? Um, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And to sort of introduce this idea, and to sort of talk about this loophole, right, and to sort of introduce this idea, I want to sort of introduce a new term, called syncretic culture, right? Syncretic culture. Now, what is syncretic culture, right? Syncretic culture is this creation of new culture by combining different aspects of multiple cultures or religions. So, right, it's sort of like taking one religion or one culture, taking another person's culture, sort of mashing up together and creating some sort of fusion, right? That's syncretic culture, right? Now, to sort of spark our discussion, what we're going to do is we're going to watch this video, right? And as you're watching, what I want you to do is I want you to write down in your notebook and answer this question: why did Punjabis and Mexicans end up intermarrying in the United States? Why did Punjabis and Mexicans end up intermarrying in the United States? As we play this video, again, write that in your notebook. Write the answer to that question in your notebook. Why did Punjabis and Mexicans intermarry? Let's take a listen to this video.
जिस है सहाय होए भगवान, जिस है सहाय होए भगवान, अनक जतन हुआ.
My name is David Dillon, and I live in the Imperial Valley of Southern California. This desert region, just north of the Mexican border, attracted its first settlers a century ago. They came from the East Coast, from Europe, and from Asia, and they turned the desert into the largest irrigation district in the Western Hemisphere. Among those farmers were men from the Punjab province of northern India. They were all labeled Hindus, even though most were of the Sikh religion and some were Muslim. Around that time, there was a growing fear of Asians in this country, and a new law decreed that these men could not become American citizens, nor could they own the land they farmed. For many, this meant giving up the profits of years of labor. Conflict was inevitable. In those difficult times, the men from Punjab found acceptance among the women from Mexico.
This is Lucia mother. And you see this man?
My grandmother, Isabel Gonzalez, was a young farm worker from Mexico when she married my grandfather, Inder Singh, a cotton grower from Punjab. Over the years, he learned to speak Spanish, and she learned to spice chicken with curry.
Fantastic, right? Remember that at the end of the day, Punjabis and Mexicans end up intermarrying because those who are Sikh could not own land. And to get around this, their marriages to those who are Mexicans, right? Mexican wives could own land, right? Their marriage to those who are Mexican allowed them to sort of own land in their wives' name, or in their wife's name, right? In their wife's name. So they were able to still cultivate and own their land and use their land in any way, shape, or form, as long as it was under their wife's name. In the next little section of this video, what I want you to do is I want you to write down some examples of ways Punjabis and Mexican intermarriages created new culture. So how did Punjabis and Mexican intermarriages create a new culture? Go ahead and write some examples in your notebook as we watch through this video. So again, how did Punjabi and Mexican intermarriages create a new culture? Go ahead and write down some examples as we listen.
As a result, my mother Irene grew up with the best of both worlds.
Pero Socorro no se dejó. Esa es otra historia.
My grandfather was of the Sikh faith, but my mother says he drove the family to Catholic church every week.
And he would just park outside St. Anthony's Church, stay in the pickup, and just wait for us till we were out of church. And there were days or Sundays when they had something special going on in the Sikh temple. Then, instead of going to the restaurant, my mother, my sister, myself, would go to the Sikh temple to eat. They'd serve curry food and kara, all kinds of nice stuff. And then my mother would visit with her friends, all the other Mexican ladies that were married to the Hindus. And we would just hang around there, with the young people.
Interracial marriages were discouraged by the state of California, but Sucha Singh Gadiwal and Lala Sandoval made their marriage work.
When I was born, my mother was going to call me Maria, and my father said to her, call her Premi. Premi means love in the Indian, Prem means love in the Indian language. So the doctor, he didn't put down Prem or Premi on the birth certificate. He just put Mary. And that was the end of it. And my mother is the one that always called me Premi. My father always called me Mary. It was just the reverse of what each one had named me.
When it was Mary's turn to be married, she chose Nikka Singh Gill, one of the next generation of immigrants from Punjab and a veteran of World War II. After the war, Asian immigrants were allowed to become U.S. citizens, but becoming American was still a difficult process.
So, some examples of Punjabis and Mexican intermarriages creating new culture were laid out in this video. What I want you to do now is I want you to turn to your elbow partner and just discuss for 30 seconds. What were some examples of ways in which Punjabis and Mexicans ended up sharing and creating a new culture, a syncretic culture from their own independent and unique cultures themselves. Go ahead and take 30 seconds and turn to your elbow partner to discuss. Seb, go ahead and pause this video. Again, hope you had a very fantastic discussion with your elbow partner. Remember that some ways, some examples that Punjabis and Mexicans created this new syncretic culture, right? They married into each other's families. Many of them had families that spoke both English, Hindi, or Punjabi, and English, right? Or Spanish, sorry. So Spanish, English, Punjabi, right? Sometimes Hindi, right? Trilingual. Um, they attended both mass and they attended temple, right? Sikh temple. They also, answered to Spanish nicknames. They had different names, right? Names that were in Punjabi, names that were in Spanish, and names that were also in English, right? So all of these are good examples of this sort of new culture that was forming because of these intermarriages. Last little bit of this video. I want you to answer in your notebook. How was getting US citizenship still so difficult in the United States? How was getting US citizenship still so difficult in the United States? How was getting US citizenship still so difficult in the United States? Let's take a listen.
Bhagat Singh Sangha went back to his family in India. He loved his village, but not the Indian government, and soon returned to the United States.
I came citizen in 1950 in the month of December.
Kartar Kaur came to the valley when Punjabi wives were allowed in under the new immigration policy. Her stepson Padmatma remembers her.
She didn't make a very big adjustment at all, mainly because of the language factor. Her dress was changing towards the Western influence, but she didn't make the adjustment too well. She didn't trust very many people, not even within our family.
Nos pasamos para este lado, pues ya nos
My
casamos
grandmother
en
speaks of a sadness that many must have lived with. She wanted to visit Mazatlan, where she was born, but never did. It is best this way, she says. She remembers the good times. It wouldn't be the same again.
Mi vida cuando yo era muy feliz. Yo creo que ya no iba a poder ser feliz como en entonces.
Alrighty, we're going to pause there. Again, take 30 seconds. Go ahead and discuss your answer with your elbow partner. How is getting US citizenship still difficult in the United States? Right? How is getting US citizenship still so difficult for Punjabis and Sikhs in the United States? Go ahead and take 30 seconds. Alrighty. The last thing we're going to discuss today before we jump to our quiz is going to be modern immigration. So in 1965, we see the passage of the Immigration and Nationality Act, and the INA, or Immigration and Nationality Act, the INA of 1965, ends up removing any quotas that sort of determined who is and who can't get into the United States, right? And so we see an explosion of immigration specifically from India. What I want you to do is I want you to take a look at the graph to the right of the screen here. And I want you to sit down with your elbow partner and I want you to discuss and write one observation down about the graph to the right. So go ahead and take 30 seconds, sub. If you could pause this video, discuss, write down one observation in your notebook. Go ahead. So folks, as you can see in the graph on the right, we see an explosion and exponential growth in Indian population in the United States, right? In 1980, literally 15 years after the INA is passed, we see about 206,000 Indians in the United States. And by the time we get to 2021, just 3 years ago, we see 2,709,000 South Indians in the United States, right? So we see year after year, decade after decade, numbers are doubling, right? Tripling from the decade before. And so, at the end of a day, right, uh, in the United States, we nearly see 2.7 million Indian immigrants in the US, right? That's nearly 6% of our population. And, gentlemen, one of the reasons why I want to bring South Asians into our ethnic studies class and talk about South Asian immigration is because many of, for those students who are South Asian here, right, many of your parents came over to the Bay Area and to the United States because of more job opportunities, particularly when it came to Silicon Valley, right? I'm willing to bet that if you're South Asian, right, many of your parents are working in some sort of tech, right? Whether it be microchips, whether it be working in some sort of working for Apple, right? Some big tech company, right? Samsung, um, Cisco, right? Whatever it happens to be, right? These big companies are setting up huge headquarters located in the Bay Area, and your parents, many of them, are working at these large tech companies. And so, as a result, right, job opportunities, a huge driving factor, a huge sort of pull factor, right, that the United States uses to incentivize more immigrants to the United States. The next time we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about H-1B visas, one way that South Asians can come over to the United States. But right now, what we're going to do is we're going to pause and we are going to start our quiz, right? So go ahead and take out your surfaces. You'll need those. Remember that you need to get into Lockdown Browser via Google Chrome or Internet Explorer or whatever you want to use. All right, click on that, then click on the quiz on Canvas, and then it'll pop you in a Lockdown Browser. The passcode should be located at the very top of your quiz. It is KOI, K-O-I with a capital K. Please make sure that you are on Lockdown Browser and go ahead and take your exam. There are no pictures this time, so don't need to worry about that. For the short answer questions, just make sure that you answer in complete sentences unless I tell you otherwise. So again, unless I tell you otherwise in the question, answer using complete sentences. Okay, one extra credit question, that's the one at the very end. Good luck, and I will see you all on Thursday.